DMZ Area. The Korean DMZ is a demilitarized zone located at the border between North and South Korea, but the name might fool you, as it's actually one of the most heavily militarized places in the world, with hundreds of thousands of troops on both sides. If you try to escape from here and you're lucky enough not to get shot by one of the soldiers, you will probably either step on a landmine or get electrocuted by one of the electric fences. There is one situation, however, where this type of escape might make more sense than the others, and that's in the case you're actually one of the soldiers supposed to guard the border. It would still be a nearly impossible feat, of course, but you might have that slightly higher chance than a normal civilian. From the sea to the south. For over 40 years, North Koreans have tried to make the journey to South Korea by boat, as South Korea's government recognizes everyone in the Korean peninsula as South Korean citizens. There are two locations from where this escape route can be tried, the West Coast or the East Coast. The West Coast is considered easier to navigate, but since the North Korean government knows that too, you might be more likely to encounter the North Korean Navy patrolling the sea. Trying from the more northern part of the West Coast has its risks too, as the seas aren't that predictable, and considering the fact that you might be using a non-advanced wooden boat with little to no navigational equipment, you might even risk ending up back along North Korea's coast or in China, which has a treaty with North Korea to deport escapees. Some have even tried swimming to South Korea to avoid detection from the Navy, as the boat is more visible, but that would be really risky, of course. The East Coast has rougher seas and steeper coastlines, making it really problematic too. But at least if you end up wandering too far, you don't end up in North Korea's ally territory, you end up in Japan. The Chinese Path. On the northern border with China, there are two rivers, the Yalu River and the Tumen River. The Tumen River is the most commonly used route, as it's considered slower, narrower, and shallower, making it an easier crossing point. But even here, most people who try escaping don't make it alive. The Northern Korean Border Patrol is also really present in this area, and some even hide underground with their weapons pointing out through holes, ready for shooting at people escaping. If you do manage to get into China, you'd still have a lot to do to be safe, as China has one of the world's largest and best surveillance systems. You'd have to make your way to a safe country across China, hoping to not be stopped by anyone as you wouldn't understand their language. Not only that, but there's also the risk of getting kidnapped for human trafficking, which is the fate many Northern Korean escapees suffer from. In that case, the best case scenario, which is still terrible, would be to be a woman who gets sold as a wife to Chinese villagers, which at least would give them a roof over their heads and some food, a somewhat better situation than the others go through. There is another way to kind of make it to a safe place in China, as the South Korean Embassy and the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees are in Beijing. Once you get in these places, you'd have immunity from the Chinese authorities, and they couldn't come in to arrest you. But the problem is that it's hard to get into them in the first place, as the Chinese police stay in that area to arrest any escapee before they enter the embassy. Furthermore, to get into South Korea, you'd have to get out of the embassy to go on a plane, making you once again susceptible to the Chinese authorities. Asia's underground railroads. In China, there's a network of dangerous underground routes that take you across China until you reach a safe country in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asian countries have varying levels of alliance with North Korea. For example, Thailand is considered to be the safest option, as they deport escapees not to North Korea but to South Korea. To get to Thailand, though, you first have to get through Laos, which isn't friendly to escapees just like China. Since you couldn't go through Laos's checkpoint, you'd have to make your way through the Laotian jungle and its mountains, and if you manage to do that, you still have the last obstacle to cross, the Mekong River, which has crocodiles. For this reason, many North Koreans just surrender themselves to the Thai police once they cross the border. However, this route across Chinese soil doesn't come without dangers either. Buses and trains are frequently stopped to check for passports and ID, and since you wouldn't know a word of Chinese, you'd be caught immediately. The Gobi Desert. The route from the Gobi Desert to Mongolia is more hostile than the others, but it's also shorter. The Gobi Desert is known for its mountains, dunes, and extreme weather conditions, both cold and hot, not to mention the fact that it's populated by wolves, bears, and snow leopards. Mongolia is considered to be one of the best countries for North Korean escapees, as they usually just send them to South Korea without many bureaucratic problems. However, recently border control has become tighter, so it's an option that's being used less and less. The West. North Koreans can seek asylum from Western countries through their embassies and other places, like NGOs and the UNHCR. A Western country would be better for a North Korean for many reasons. In South Korea, they might face discrimination. There are harder punishments for the family back home if they escape to South Korea. The application wait time can take a bit longer. The Western countries are physically further from North Korea, and they have more opportunity for successful careers once they learn the local language. Right now, there are thousands of North Koreans living in the European area, especially in the UK, where there's a community of around 600 escapees in southwest London. The reason many North Koreans don't seek asylum in the US is that that since birth, they have been taught that all of the bad stuff that happened in their lives was caused by the US, and it's pretty hard to remove such an entrenched belief. Furthermore, the processing time in the US can be several years, so most of them just prefer Europe. Labor camps. People in North Korean camps live in absolute hell, with inedible food, disgusting housing, and insane work hours. The fact is that North Korea doesn't have its camps only on its own soil. They also have them in foreign countries, especially Russia, where the largest North Korean workforce outside the DPRK is found when it comes to labor camps. They usually work on logging camps in remote Siberian locations with extreme harsh winters, but nonetheless, North Koreans want to be sent there all the time. That's because those camps don't have heavily guarded borders and landmines like the North Korean borders do, making it much easier to escape. But there's a catch. In order to be able to be sent to these Russian camps, the North Korean government does an extreme vetting process, checking if you're healthy, have a history of loyalty to North Korea's party, and you have to be married with children. The last one is the most problematic one, as they do this to avoid making you escape by threatening to harm your family in case you do. The only remaining options would be for the escapes to help their families escape as well, or to completely ditch them and run away while they get punished, which isn't as rare as you might think, but we aren't able to judge them in my opinion. High social class. North Korea's elite usually don't escape because they have much more security than poor people, and when they do, it's not for problems like poverty or hunger, but for intellectual freedom. That's because many of these rich North Koreans usually work for the military, government, or state businesses abroad, so they have an experience of what the other countries are like and thus realize how much they're imprisoned. For people who have money, escaping is much easier, as they can pay escape brokers to smuggle them out of the country and bribe border security. They also usually buy fake South Korean passports and IDs, so if they're stopped by the Chinese police, they have an excuse, and they can pay for flights instead of having to go through the dangerous underground routes or the Gobi Desert. Some students have the opportunity to study overseas, and some athletes go abroad to participate in competitions, so it's much easier for them to just stay where they are and not go back. The problem of the family back home still remains though, as they'd suffer the consequences of the escape. North Korean diplomats who are stationed overseas are usually required to leave their children in Pyongyang before taking their flight, just so they can hold them as hostages and ensure their return. As a last note, I'd like to show you this graph that shows the yearly amounts of escapees, which shows how much harder it's becoming for North Koreans to escape. If you want to discuss this video or suggest an idea for the next one, join my Discord, link in the description.